everybody. Dr. Rick here, dropping in on you. Hope everybody is closing out your week on a good note. Look, a lot to cover in a very short period of time, but it's gotta be done. So, first and foremost, if you like what you hear and see on this channel, click the like button, click the share button, subscribe. Real simple. Look, if you haven't checked it out yet, my close friend, Dr. David Jones, who is the CEO and founder of the Wellspring Clinic and Family Institute, who has been working with me over the last year or so in reaching people in the inner city in the Houston area. He happens to be from Detroit, but he has been here for 20 years and he has been putting in work. And we partnered with Harris County Sheriff's Office, a couple of other organizations, Green Light Church, so that Greenhouse Church, International Church, to do some work. And the interview we did on Monday is now up on the Black Voice channel and several other places as we discuss epigenetics, generational trauma, healing generational trauma, Black progression, as a part of my efforts of working with Harris County and the Wellspring Clinic to address trauma, but also to bridge the gap of trust between law enforcement and also reduce recidivism in the Black community, which would be a very powerful tool in working against mass incarceration. So check out that interview. It's posted on the channel, so check it out. In the same vein, we have been doing a series of short videos on the importance of Black love and how Black love is actually correlated and inextricably connected to wealth building and the projection of Black wealth through your line or your lineage down to your progeny and offspring. And so today I want to talk real briefly about how we got from 1960, where 75% of Black youth were born into two-parent households, to where we are now, to where we're roughly 73 to 75% of Black youth are born into single-parent households, and how that directly correlates to our inability to close the wealth gap. We are matriculating, especially our women, at a rate unheard of over the last 30 years, and moving even beyond that, but definitely over the last 30 years. We are matriculating, we are enrolling in higher learning institutions at an unbelievable and phenomenal rate. We are getting the skins, those degrees, and yet we are experiencing a widening in the wealth gap, and we can't seem to explain how. Well, one of the reasons that nothing has changed is in 1960, as I stated, roughly 75% of Black youth. And when you understand everything that we went through over the first 246 years of being in, from 1619 to 1865, 246 years of chattel slavery, 12 years of Reconstruction, 10 plus years of Black codes and convict leasing, 76 years of Jim Crow segregation, redlining, benign neglect, urban renewal, another 45 to 50 years of gentrification, mass incarceration, and miseducation. And yet by 1960, we still were holding together and solidifying families at a rate of in which 75% of our children were being born into two-parent households. This isn't to project that those relationships were perfect. This is to talk about the outline of how we were growing. At that time, in 1960, we owned our own movie theaters. We owned our own cab companies. We owned our own bus companies. We owned all the things we needed to sustain ourselves and build and grow, and we were growing and we were sustaining our households. What's interesting to note is we didn't have the level of matriculation we have now. It didn't mean that we didn't have people who were intelligent. It didn't mean that we weren't quite a remarkable and intellectually gifted people. It just means that we were not exercising our intellectual gifts in the world of academia at the rate that we're doing it now, but we were faring more. We were faring better. Well, several things happened during that time. Number one was the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was a time in which we were fighting for the right to patronize white businesses, to sit in white spaces where we weren't welcome. And in order to do that, what it meant was you can't patronize these spaces, these white spaces, without neglecting black spaces. And so what happened was blacks began to sell off these businesses within the community, and they went through the hands of first the Jewish community, then the Asian and Arab communities predominantly took hold of what the Jewish community no longer wanted ownership in. It's been the same thing since. You went from Jewish grocery stores and all cleaners and everything else to Asian cleaners, Asian beauty supply stores, Asian nail shops, and then you would have Arab gas stations and liquor stores. This is pretty much how things are laid out in the community right now today. Well, that was a big part of it. In order to build wealth, you have to have ownership, and you have to have ownership in a vertical sphere. In other words, it's not just group economics, it's vertical group economics, meaning that if I dominate spending in any particular industry, I should also dominate ownership in that industry. And the way you dominate ownership is not just on the retail level, it's on manufacturing and distribution and retail. Why is that important? If I control manufacturing and distribution, I control pricing. If I control pricing, I'm able to ensure that people who look like me get fair deals and are able to sustain their business and compete. What happened in the beauty supply industry, for example, is they dominate manufacturing and distribution and retail. And when a black individual attempts to get in on the retail end, they have to go through Asians to get the distribution, and the manufacturers control the pricing. So in other words, blacks get the poor deal. So in other words, something they're paying $2.99 a unit for, Asian competitors who are either next door or across the street are paying 99 cents per unit for, and there's no competition, because in that black community, blacks are not going to support the black business solely based on the fact that they know that business needs to be. Matter of fact, they're going to deride that black business for charging more than the Asian business, and then they're going to patronize the Asian business. Not because I think that's what's going to happen, because I've watched it happen over and over again. I've studied it for years, and it's simply how we move. So that's a part of it. We gave away what we owned. Also, there was a move to commodify the black man while simultaneously defunding the black man. The commodification of the black man, when I say that, what I mean is it was a cultural and systematic movement to put a price tag on the head of a black man from the perspective of a black woman. In other words, when she saw him, what she saw first was what he was able to do financially. And there's nothing wrong with expecting a man to be a provider, nothing at all whatsoever. Let me get that clear out. But here's the problem. When you expect him to be a provider, you must also be aware of what he's facing and what he's up against. And you must also see yourself as an instrument of his liberation to be a provider. In other words, you must ask yourself, what can I do to better help him become better equipped to cover me, to provide for me? Not just roll up and sit up and think this is what you're supposed to do. So what happened is they commodified the black man. Then they deindustrialized the inner city. You have to understand that when black men were being sole providers throughout the early 1900s up until the 1960s, they were doing so predominantly without public education or what we would consider having full educations. They weren't graduating from high school. These were people with less than a high school education who were providing for their families. Why? Because there were industrial jobs within the inner city that they can get. They can work at plants, especially in the Midwest. You had the big three, Chrysler, Ford, and GM. You had the big three, but you also had down through the Midwest, you had the plants, you had the power plants, you had all these different places that they eventually moved the grand bulk of them outside of the inner city. When they abandoned the inner city, they abandoned the black man. Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote in his report, The Negro Family, A Case for National Action, known as the Moynihan Report, told them that the thing to do was be, instead of pouring so much money into social programs like welfare, like the food stamp program and other things that would, Medicaid and all these different things that would be offered to women and children, use that money to create jobs in the inner city, and in doing so allow black men to take care of the black family. And they ignored it, and so that was the deindustrialization. At the same time they were deindustrializing the inner city, they were also taking the ability to learn a craft out of the schools. So they took wood shop, auto mechanics, electricians, things that you could literally learn in high school, and literally leave high school with the training to go out and make more money than the average person makes. You got to understand, right now today, auto mechanics, electricians, plumbers, and carpenters all make more than the average person with a bachelor's degree. And especially in most areas where the bachelor's degree has become almost useless. Matter of fact, master's degrees and in many instances PhDs don't perform as well as a trade. And a trade also allows you to become an owner without permission. And what I mean when I say an owner without permission, I mean that nobody has to hire you once you have become solidified and accredited in your trade. You can go out, you can open up your own garage, you can open up your own electrician and plumbing business, you can go out and you can become an auto mechanic. All of these different things you can do on your own. You can go out and get training in how to do landscaping, and you can start your own landscaping company. We definitely know that now. We used to be the landscapers, and now we're paying the landscapers, and they don't look like us. But that's because we bought into the way to get the paper is to spend $100,000, $150,000 on that degree that becomes ultimately useless, that it takes you 25 years to pay back the debt it took you to get it. So in other words, another instrument against matter of fact, the number one enemy of wealth is what? Debt. The way that they do is they strap you down before you ever get started. If you look at one of the reasons why there's this ever-widening gap of 177,000 median household wealth for them and 70,000 for us, and that's widening, is because they underwrite the vast majority of their children's education. They have college funds that they start when they hear the child is conceived, and they do that. And many of them have money set aside, but if not, they start a college fund. So little Karen and little Ted are going to go to school predominantly with less debt, and they also know other ways to get money where it isn't actually going to cost them or be assessed as debt. In other words, they don't have to pay it back. Whereas in the vast majority of us on a grander scale, not that that's not happening to them as well, but not on the scale that it's happening to us. And again, that is moving and working against our wealth. And so we have these different mechanisms. Then, because of the disenfranchisement and the inability of the black man to really truly step up, and I have to admit, a lack of not of a whole lot of a fight. And I think it's because we were never really truly organized as men. We saw each other as competition, and so we all were trying to prove that we could do what the other guy couldn't do, and we never unified to fix that issue within the community. So then we were one by one plucked off The ones who were able to make it made it. The rest were plucked off and they had to reevaluate, restart, and that created separation in the home. We never really overcame that. And this isn't about an excuse. This is about history. And so what you've got to understand is we've got these situations where what happened? The family dissipated. What happens when the family dissipate? We have the same level of ownership in the black community, home ownership in the black community that we had in 1960. And why is that? Because they made it more difficult for us to operate and move, because they took the components of our growth, income, out of the inner city, then said, okay, you can't do it without a high school education because we took all those jobs. Now you gotta go get a high school education, but now you deride it with debt. So you're less likely to buy a home because you're trying to pay down the debt that you have right now. Number two, you can't afford a home because it's one person buying instead of two. And you create this hostility, you create all these other things that come along with it. Now you're rearing children because you haven't stopped procreating. You just stopped being together. You're still making babies. You're not staying together. And then here's the other thing they did. And it didn't just impact the black community, but it had a more negative impact on the black community. They changed the qualifications for divorce. It used to be before 1972 that you had to show that your mate violated the covenant parameters of your marriage. They cheated, they were abusive, something along the line that you now, after 1972, what did they do? They changed it to insupportability or irreconcilable differences. What did that mean? You just walk into a courtroom and say, I don't get along with my ex anymore. Judge asks you, is there any chance possible that over the next year you could work it out and you sit up and say no, and the judge says divorce granted? And so now nobody is in a position where they have to work on anything. And when you don't have to do something and it becomes difficult, it becomes frustrating, it becomes challenging, what do? You put it down. We see it with business. We see it with school. We see it with our visions and dreams, hopes and aspirations, and we see it in our relationship. Nobody is fighting for anything. Everybody's jumping from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing, the thing that we can at least afford to do. Well, that's just one of the things we've got to work on. So again, my challenge is it's time for us to educate ourselves. It's time for us to wake up and be aware of the things that we're doing that are not working for our benefit. It's time for us to stand up and come together and unify. It's time for us to have a plan and an agenda. If you would have asked the average person what's the black agenda, they couldn't tell you because there isn't one. And they don't even know what we should be doing. This is one of the reasons I created this channel, is to bring about knowledge, not for sensationalism, not to sit up and become a gossiping meal, not to sit up and entertain you, not to sit up and become your buddy and your friend, but to sit up and say, hey, look, this is what needs to be done. This is what they're doing. They know what makes you tick more than you do because they're spending energy and effort to study you and understand you and know how to control, manipulate, and mishandle you to the point that you will literally beg them to do it. And it's our responsibility to change that. So on that note, look, I'm going to get ready to get out of here. As I said earlier, if you haven't, check out that interview with Dr. David Jones on the Admit One podcast that kind of covers the work we're doing in the inner city and not just in Houston. This is something that we're pushing to do around. Check it out. If you believe in what you're hearing and seeing, and you want to see more work done, you want to see more galvanization and energy and effort, look in the description box and see how you can support and help us. On that note, I'm out of here. You guys have an unbelievable remainder of your day.